warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today for the third edition of the Space Reformers Enabler Dialogue of Spaceport SARABHAI. Spaceport SARABHAI's mission, just to recap, is to provide research-based policy guidance to the government and accelerate India's transformation into a developed space economy. And today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome 4 young and exceptional lawyers working in the space industry to share insights on their unique career paths. We have with us Tanushree Joshi, Senior Legal and Business Development Manager with Hex 20 Global, Geetanjali Kamath, Legal Associate at Digantra, Keyur Gandhi, Associate Director, Space Regulatory at Dhruva Space, and Rishiraj Barua, Senior Associate, AZB and Partners. Welcome to all of you again. A quick heads up, this session is being recorded. We'll save the last 15 to 20 minutes for questions. So please feel free to post any of your questions in the Q&A tab as the session progresses. To jump right into it, we'd love to hear about your journey, dear panelists. So please introduce yourself briefly and tell us how you found yourself in the space industry. Tanushree, maybe we'll start with you.
I'll just quickly introduce myself, and then maybe I can share as to how I started with the space industry. So this is Tanushree Joshi. I am a space lawyer, and I'm currently working as a senior legal and a business development manager with Hex 20 Global.
Thanks, Tanushree. Keyur?
Hi, everyone. I'm Keyur Gandhi. I work leading space regulation for Dhruva Space. I think I'll just save it to the introduction.
Rishi? Rishi, you're on. Your sound is on mute.
Oh, sorry, I was speaking on mute. Let's go again. This is Rishi Raj. I work with AZB and Partners. I work with the aerospace team, and primarily while I do a lot of work in aviation, we've also recently started working in the space sector. Of course, my interest has always been in the space, so it's quite exciting to be here. We can discuss other details as we go ahead.
Geetanjali?
Hi, everyone. My name is Geetanjali Kamath. I work in the legal and policy department at Digantra, and really happy to be on this panel today.
Okay, let's go ahead with a bit about your career journey. So better to hear your story from yourself. So let's maybe do the same loop. Tanushree, let's start with you.
So firstly, thanks a lot for having all of us here. And it's great to see other space lawyers on this panel as well, which is very rare here in India. So to begin with, about space and space law, it just, as a kid, I was very interested in space and aviation. But growing up, I realized that this is not something that I wanted to do. And I tried avoiding it as much as possible, only to see myself back in this sector, but from a different profession. So about space law, I came across a book during my law course, and later my participation in Manfred Lax is something that really built upon this interest, and this is something that I wanted to complete. I started my journey with Skyroot Aerospace, wherein I was offered the role of both as a legal associate as well as a business development associate. So that is how I started my journey in the space industry.
Thanks, Tanushree. Keyur, on to you.
So I actually don't have any particular journey which led me to the space industry, so to say. Like, I think I was always excited about being a lawyer ever since the time I can remember being in school. And then when I was in college, of course, I wanted to explore a lot. So I went all into the incubation and policy ecosystem. 5 years of law school gives you a lot of time to do very many things. And towards the end of law school is when I ended up meeting a space tech startup on a very small consulting assignment. And from there, I actually had the chance to sort of ring up many founders in the space sector to understand what has been going on. And from there, I realized that if I had to move my career forward where I could still explore, still do a lot and make a lot of difference as a lawyer, space sector is the place to be, because so heavily regulated, no law in the country, and this is back in 2021. So that's how I ended up. I think I remember reaching out to many companies, and Dhruva Space was always one of my favorite picks because I always saw full stack everywhere. So it was more company and circumstances driven, but today it's certainly the career of choice, and I do not intend to switch out for the rest of my life. That's where it's reached now.
Thanks, Keyur. That's a big commitment, huh? So we might hold you up to it.
I look forward to that.
Thanks. Rishi?
Hi. So, well, I mean, it's an ongoing journey, so I wouldn't say we've just started, getting into the space sector as a country. Personally, I got interested into this, in area more academically speaking. When I was in law school, I did the Manfred Lax. That is what got me interested into space law. Then I did, I mean, that is what prompted me to consider it as an option, because I was quite fascinated by this esoteric field of law. I did an internship at ISRO while I was in law school, which then prompted me to further pursue my master's in air and space law from Leiden. Uh, and then, of course, given that, and I did it in 2017, which was 2016, which was a couple of years ago. And then, I started off as where, the things were yet to develop as such. This the ecosystem, the space ecosystem, which has just started developing. It was yet to develop in the country, so I started off as an aviation lawyer, but as and when things moved, years passed, and the uh, interest of the private sector started growing. Uh, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to, be part of some interesting transactions in this sector. So I think, and that is something I intend to continue. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Rishi. Geetanjali?
So I think everyone here on this panel has a shared passion for space. So nothing different here as well. Always was passionate about space, and I think the earliest start to this journey was really when, in my 12th grade, as a part of the International Baccalaureate Diploma program, I chose astrophysics as my optional paper subject. So studying 6 months of that, I think, was really exciting. So, I mean, although I decided to come back to India and then do my undergraduate degree in law, again, in my final year, I had an opportunity to specialize in business laws, out of which one of the streams was again air and space law. So transitioning from there, joining a law firm in their general corporate department, working there for 3 years, I felt the need to, specialize in the field of space law, because of this interest that has always been there. And yeah, I mean, decided to do my master's in air and space law from Leiden University, and then started my job here at the Gantra, and loving every bit of it, to be honest.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. I mean, although there are similarities, what's interesting is that you all take a different approach to your practice, whether it's with a law firm or with your own companies. So I'd like to share a bit of your stories also with our audience. Starting perhaps with the Keyur this time. You are someone, as I learned, who decided that you didn't want to practice. And you take an interdisciplinary approach to the work that you do. So can you share a bit more about how this interdisciplinary knowledge is crucial and how that enables you to work on some of the cooler things that you're doing, also with the end-to-end agreements with Dhruva Space and so on?
Sure. I think so. I think one of the key highlights that I'm taking from the question is interdisciplinary approach and end-to-end, and no practice. So I think the role that I'm playing today is more or less of a regulatory professional, right? Where you're deep diving into the tech of the company, the products, the services, the approach that should be taken to safety and sustainability in using space, the approach to spectrum coordination, the approach to export control, and especially when we are at a juncture where the space policy has come out, but there are a lot of other laws that need to realign with that. And then as a startup in the space sector in India, you don't have much to look up to either in terms of jurisprudence or in terms of mentors or other companies who you would be able to look up to. And I think that is a shared problem here across the board. So that is what really led to the idea of, okay, let's go and deep dive with the tech team. I remember, I think it started not even with something fancy like a ITU filing or a space mission authorization. It started with something as simple as what should be categorized as a wireless item. So like, and figuring out export from there, and then going and convincing customs and everything that follows. And these are pretty standard components, right? When you look at it in the larger scheme of things that you use for a space mission. So it started from there. And I think the interest only grew more and more keen from there, because that approach did allow some traction and some speed to come in the way we were looking at being able to make internal structures and being able to understand how to navigate our next steps as we look at space globally, not just in India. So yes, it involved reading up some physics, bugging the tech team a lot, bugging the business team a lot, and also, of course, as many government departments as possible. And very happy to say here today that it's been almost 3 years, and everyone in the ecosystem has been cooperative, tolerant with a lawyer who is trying to understand what is a wave, to now when we are doing things on ITU, on different payloads and stuff like that. So that has been an interesting journey, a lot of self-learning, a major learning curve in terms of shifting from a lawyer to a regulatory professional, even in terms of the basic tenets that you follow as a lawyer in your approach to work. Those have shifted quite well, because it now goes more on to problem solving than to just looking at the legal part of it or the agreement part of it. So yeah, I think I hope that covers well. I'll save more for the next questions.
Thanks, Keyur. I'll now jump to Tanushree, because Keyur, you mentioned that you had to bother the tech team and the business team. We have Tanushree, who was both the legal and the business team during her experience with Skyroot. So Tanushree, I can imagine you played both the good cop and bad cop when you were interacting with your different stakeholders. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you've already mentioned, I had to carefully switch my hats and also make the company understand on how both these teams actually work very differently. And there's a lot of diversity in terms of your perspective towards an agreement or even a sale for that matter. So with this role, I was directly offered as a legal and a business development associate. While I came from a complete legal background, not having much understanding on the technical aspects of space, rockets, or everything else connected to this, I undertook this role thinking that it is interesting, and this is actually something that can help me introduce to the space sector. For me, in order to provide some, I would say, feasible solutions for the company, so that we are able to actually achieve what the goal of the company is, it was important for me to understand how the industry works, what we are trying to offer as a product or as a service. And business development actually there came as came in aid, because it gave me a critical understanding on every aspect, from what the customer needs to what we offer, to what are the risks that both parties have to undertake, and how can you provide a solution not to just for the benefit of a single company, but all the entities involved in the agreement. So, yeah.
Thanks, Tanushree. Geetanjali, for you, I have a question based on the work that you've done with the Paris Peace Forum and so on. So you've had quite a lot of interactions at the international fora, different international fora, with both institutional and commercial players. What's that like?
Yes, I mean, that was a fantastic opportunity to be a part of the Paris Peace Forum, particularly the working group on governance of in-orbit servicing activities. And this involvement actually spanned around a period of 6 months, wherein different stakeholders, international spacecraft operators, SSA entities, were a part of the group coming together to draft recommendations on the appropriate legal and regulatory framework for such activities. When you collaborate on such an international platform, I think it gives you more insight on the problem statement, what is feasible as a governance framework that can be suggested to states, from which it can trickle down to their respective private actors. And also, one of the interesting points of discussion that we had on that forum was how government and private space actors can enter into data sharing agreements for SSA actors, addressing the sensitive concerns also that states have at a national level. And this is, of course, that we have seen many governments, including a lot of interest being generated from the US, something that they've been working on actively for the past couple of months. So such collaborations, especially providing recommendations and inputs for space policy at an international level, helps to understand concerns from raised by other space actors from across jurisdictions, and particularly the sort of roadblocks and obstacles that they have faced in approaching their regulators. So, or where they have found governments to be more accepting of, let's just say, standards and best practices, which is, I guess, on an international level, soft law is the most feasible way of solving for these issues.
Thanks, Geetanjali. Rishi, compared to what our other panelists have shared, you have a bit of an interesting role considering you work at a law firm. So you can take an outsider's look into these different stakeholders. How do you tailor your approaches when dealing with questions from startups versus established companies versus, let's say, governmental agencies on the same topic, but from these different perspectives? How do you deal with that?
So, as a lawyer, as an external lawyer, I think we play different roles based on the need of the client. There are, startups. I mean, there are various stakeholders and players in the ecosystem. You have investors, right, who are looking after their money where they're investing into a startup. The startups who want to, grow. Then there are established companies who already have, good level of funding, but they're looking for more legal certainty. And also, their interests are slightly different. And the way they look at the jurisdiction, etc., is also slightly different. Government also, from a regulatory perspective, as of today, we have a regulator in space, but what they also call themselves is that they are a startup regulator, right? They're also they've just started off with drafting their regulations, their internal policies, how they interact, and their the manner in which they need to interact with the private entities. So I think there are different lenses through which we need to when we are dealing with these different kind of stakeholders, we need to have a different kind of approach. Uh, well, I have worked with startups as well, a few startups who are looking, for funding. They've just started out. They also look, I mean, and since these startups do not essentially have uh, internal legal teams, I mean, all the panelists here are from really established, teams and established players, but there are also a lot of startups who do not have the understanding that legal is an integral part of and regulatory advice is an integral part of their business. I think that is where we come in. We try to guide them, uh, you know, into the various complex regulations, various complex different kind of regulations that apply. It's not just the space regulations, right? You have to deal with explosives, you have to deal with customs, and when you look at customs, it's part of trade. You've export control, the two different things. You and this is also a security matter, so you have to deal with the MHA. So there are various aspects that the startups need to look at. Investors, when we talk to investors, when we deal with investors, they are more keen on getting their money, their return on the investment, right? So I think that is where, as a lawyer, we advise them on the key aspects, where uh, and when you look at space investors, they don't look at space sector in isolation. They look at, they are investing into various sectors, so they have certain criteria as to what would prompt them to invest. And as lawyers, we need to ensure that in the documentation that goes into dealing with the space these fundings, these criteria are met. We've ensured that legally they are protected and their rights are protected. I think these are the different hats that we need to wear when we are advising uh, you know different clients and different stakeholders in the industry.
Rishi, something that you touched upon, and which I think all our other panelists can also address, is that quite a lot is starting up. And across the panel that we have, I know Tanushree, Gitanjali, and Keyur have the country's first something. They've worked on the country's first something. So before we go into that, I want to reflect a bit on the uncertainties in the legal and regulatory environment that persist in India. And Rishi, you were one of the first lawyers who led and coordinated feedback from an Indian delegation of lawyers on the draft space activities bill. Can you share a few words about that?
Oh yeah, that was a couple of years ago. I think the Indian government had just published their space activities bill in 2017, and they had sought feedback. They had published the draft law. Uh, Interestingly, because having some connections with the Leiden alumni group, and generally in the market, we were able to coordinate our comments, from not only from just Indian lawyers, but also globally, what are the best practices, how the jurisdictionally in different jurisdictions, how have various aspects of a space law being treated. I think it was interesting to see, different perspectives from various jurisdictions and how they looked at space law. There were many things, for instance, I think one of the interesting and bits was the IP, the treatment of IP, which the government had initially said that the IP would belong to the government if there is, I mean, that would just kill the industry. I think now they have put it, they do not no longer have that in the more recent, bill that is being considered. So I think uh, it was quite interesting also because we had, very senior Indian lawyers who had put their comments into it. And interestingly, it felt that, because at the time we had some people in ISRO who were quite receptive to the comments that we had provided. And although we do not have access to whatever has been discussed internally, but my understanding was that they appreciated the level of expertise and the level of comments that went. I think that had helped the government to come out with a better uh, solution. And then let's see what finally turns out, but we're hoping for the best. I think, Deepika, you are on mute, brother.
Now, Gitanjali, I'm going to jump to you, picking off where Rishi left. Within this uncertain framework, what sort of impacts do you see for the business? Do you see more opportunities to shape the way our industry is going to grow, or do you see more hurdles?
I would give a typical response, as most lawyers give. It depends. No, just to be no. Really, I think it gives a huge opportunity to sort of make sure that the comprehensive national space legislation that comes out has taken into account the inputs or the sort of recommendations given by different stakeholders, and we have actively been involved from the Gantra to give our suggestions, give our recommendations with the government, with also different industry bodies, and also at the same time explain the rationale for those comments. Oftentimes, what happens is that you overlook the nuances. For instance, maybe it could be alignment with the UN space treaties or some other international space law principles that would be crucial for a private space actor in India when they collaborate with each other within India, and of course when with other international partners. I think those are the aspects that need to be you need to pay attention to. So of course, while we, like Rishi mentioned, we're yet to see the final outcome out, but I think as of now, the hurdles is really, as they say, the devil is in the details. So it really boils down to implementation. And of course, I'm sure there's going to be, once it's released out, for public comments, there's going to be further inputs given by the industry. And once those things start coming into action, we will, of course, take things as they come and give our suggestions. So I think it's a bit of both, but as of now, I think it looks very positive. And I say that in the backdrop of, last year we had the Indian space policy come out. We had recently the FDI reforms also being notified. And all of these sort of legal and policy actions do signal a very positive environment for the Indian space sector, specifically, opening up to the foreign investors and opportunities with foreign collaborators. And I think that sort of these sort of actions, also bring about more legal and regulatory clarity. So positive for now, yeah. But we should wait to see what happens when the guidelines are finally issued and implemented.
Gitanjali. Keyur, then I jump to you because you're working on something very exciting. In June, the first commercial hosted payload mission of India will be launched through Dhruva Space. So I imagine you're working with a whole lot of customers from different jurisdictions and so on. Do you encounter any specific challenges because of the lack of a legal or regulatory framework?
Specific challenges, I don't think there are any specific challenges that would really need discussion here. But I think yes, in general, when you're planning a mission, the trend in the small satellite industry, which I think even ITU has taken cognizance now, there's a small satellite handbook being made specifically to address these kind of challenges. The time you think about a mission to the time by the time you're launching it is less than 6-7 months, and that timeline is not good in most countries, only to get domestic approvals itself. But on the other hand, in India, what I would like to really mention and focus on here is I think I'll take cue from what Rishi said. InSpace is also working like a startup regulator. They are there to enable. If we even go on the InSpace website and see the number of missions that have gone into space by now, or the number of payloads that have been there in the past few years, it has been amazing. So when specific challenges come, it is seldom government support or lack of policy driven. But yes, there are certain challenges which will be difficult to solve as an ecosystem in India. The first one being, now, when you're talking about a hosted payload, you're also looking at a lot of compatible standards, not just for interfaces, but also the technical standards you would hold up for typically for allowing certain space activities. The methods and the language that the regulators talk should be the same, because that really determines how we plan missions. And if we look at this by extension, uh, today when you look at the relationship across a value chain, like space objects launching from India by private companies is new, but people supplying subsystems, supplying components has been there for a lot of time. So if you look at this across the value chain, you will see a lot of similar frameworks that are being followed across companies across the globe, despite of whatever the domestic jurisdiction says, because it is always the more regulated jurisdiction that will continue to determine how you do this. So these practices do overflow. I look at it more as learning than challenges, because uh, doing these kind of missions time and again does force you to really take those steps further in um, adapting and becoming a globally resilient startup, so to say, right? But typical challenges on, okay, how would liability be looked at? How would be insurance looked at? What could be the potential limitations in terms of export control? Export control incompatibility often is the biggest. And I think outside these kind of challenges, which can still be worked around operationally, and the timeline challenge, which will remain persistent no matter what law comes, because I think that needs a global attitude shift. In fact, I was reading an interesting book. It was The Original Sin. I don't recollect the name, the exact name, but the book was all about how the space sector started off as something in the Cold War era, where it was looked at only with the eyes of military and intelligence, to now it becoming a truly global civil space program across. But for regulators and for the governments to have that shift of mindset is going to take a while, because yes, at the end of the day, these are dual use technologies which are intertwined. And outside export control and liability, I don't think there are any specific challenges today which are any different from what any other jurisdiction or any other country would be looking at. So yeah, I hope I did go around in circles, but I hope that sums it up.
Thanks, Keo. Definitely. Tanushree, would you like to add on to that, considering you worked on the first launch service agreement for an Indian private space company?
And as Keyur has mentioned, these are the first three highlights that that I'd like to highlight. Actually, 3 points is liability. Specifically, in liability is the third-party liability, because that is something that brings across the liability of the nation in consonance with the United Nations treaties. Along with that, you have insurance A for the specific product, and that may be in terms of as a launch company, what I had to look at is insurance A, either for the launch vehicle, the third-party liability, the terms of insurance therein, and the payloads of the satellites that we are trying to launch. So getting an overall aspect of that was a bit challenging, but like Keyur has mentioned, it was a good learning. Talking about the first ever launch services agreement, it was definitely something quite exciting, since there was nothing to refer back to. Until now, Indian ecosystem in terms of the space sector was more government dominated. In 2021, it started off across introducing and allowing commercial participants, and therein is when the change actually started. So to even refer to any other lawyers, or considering these agreements are very commercial, it's not something that I could even reach out to any other parties. And typically, the agreements in the space sector have clauses that are not common in any other sectors, like cross waivers, indemnification, and so on. And the way to measure these are also very different. So to understand in terms of insurance perspectives was also a bit of a challenge and was also important.
Thanks, Tanushree. I'm going to go back to Gitanjali on a topic that all of you touched upon, compatibility with the international regime. Gitanjali, Digantra is maybe the only space industry or company in the industry that has supported the Secure World Foundation's statement on international commitments to not conduct destructive ASAT tests. Could you talk about the process on how you got to signing the statement, and if you had to interact with more parties to this end?
Sure. So, I mean, as a company that endorses space sustainability, uh, when we received the declaration to be a signatory to, I mean, it was a no-brainer, honestly. We endorsed the declaration for states to not conduct DA ASATs because the problems that it triggered for space sustainability and the space economy in general. So for one, as everyone is aware, you have to tackle a congested outer space environment with an increased risk of collision. And this is where the source of a significant creation of orbital debris becomes paramount. Secondly, and also importantly, it also increases the uncertainty that space actors have when they operate in outer space. And it makes the act of launching, deployment all the more challenging, which ultimately affects the sources and levels of investment also for new space actors. So to not support the declaration is really to look the other way when someone talks about space sustainability and responsible behavior in outer space. So from the perspective of industry, that was our reasoning for supporting the declaration. At the panel, we also had representatives from the US and Japan to share their insights on the importance of this declaration. And I think that sort of shared collaboration and interaction, only strengthened our belief in the declaration. Yeah.
Thank you, Gitanjali. I want to do a round with all of you on what you could share with upcoming lawyers on stepping into the space industry. I mean, of course, there is no one path to take. So if from your experience, if you could share some, well, I wouldn't say advice, some thoughts on that, that would be great. Tanushree, can we start with you?
Sure. So for people who are interested in space, I think what is more important is to understand what the sector is all about, to stay connected with the industry as much as possible. Now, for people who are trying to, there are various aspects that you can join the sector in. If at all that you're interested from a legal perspective, doing your master's is, I think, a good way to get introduced to this learning about what space is, what are these space laws about, and also it's a great opportunity for you to network around with. But I think having your master's or any other courses is a very individual's choice and cannot be feasible for all. So in these circumstances, there are also various other options. I myself haven't yet done my master's in air and space law, and nor have I ever studied this during my entire course of law. So for 5 years, I've never studied it as a part of my curriculum, and yet here I am today. So what actually helped for me was to network around with people from various professions, either as lawyers, engineers, scientists, or even people working in the regulatory frameworks as such. Is to stay also connected with various branches of UN. There are various research working group that go on with, like IISL. There is SGAC. There are so many other webinars and events that keep taking place. So I think staying in touch and becoming or like participating in that is, I think, a great way to participate in this industry and to be a part of it.
Thanks, Tanushree. Keyur?
I think I'll just avoid repetition and go to the lesser explored points. I think the moment you enter into the space sector, you would realize that you're not just working with the space regulator, you're working with at least 6 to 7 other departments and regulators, so to say. So the expertise that one needs to build only in understanding the governance framework of a nation. That is the most crucial, because it is only then that you can get answers to all of the complex questions beyond what space law is to really do your activities. That is one. Second is, the moment you come into space law, I think one is be ready to fail, because it's not easy to find a mentor, and it's not easy to get things right the first time when you're looking at very little to no precedence. And third, I think that is more generic advice that applies to more or less everyone in house, because I'm assuming when people become space lawyers, there are not too many cases really going on. So outside the due diligence and the advisory roles that happen, your primary customers would be your organization's customers and the founders and the management of the company where you're going. So the approach would be problem solving. There is not a no which is possible as an answer ever. There's always a way to be found out to do what has to be done. So if these three things, if you're prepared for these three things, only then jump into space law.
Deepika, I think you're on mute.
I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Now, with that, I go to the outsider to pick up on some of your points, Keyur. Rishi, what are your thoughts on this?
I completely echo, what Tanushree and Keo just mentioned. Additionally, being a practicing lawyer, if someone is interested in, in the practice side of things, I think the most basic and fundamental principle is that you need to know the fundamentals of law, and then consider the specialization, because the specialization builds on various fundamental principles of the legal system. So therefore, and I mean, I won't repeat what KU said, but for sake of brevity, you need to definitely know not just one regulator. You need to know various other regulations and how they operate and intermingle with the sector. uh, and I think, as Tanushree mentioned, I think if you want to deal with this industry, you need to network with the industry. I think that applies to all industries, but I don't think that's very different for the space sector as well. Of course, you need to be knee deep into the system and the people and the stakeholders, and so that they know that you have the passion for space.
Thanks,
I
Rishi.
just want to add to what Rishi said right now. I think in the space sector, having only knowledge of space law is also not enough. You have to understand, especially if you're working in-house, it is very essential for you to have a clarity on various other aspects of law as well. Starting from Contracts Act in terms of India, or even otherwise, trying to understand on what is a legal document, what is an agreement, what is a contract, with the definitions of that. Then even going to some very important aspects as, it can be IP, it can be various other of these acts. Having a clarity on that is very essential. So if people think that their general practice or other practices in other sectors of law is not going to be useful, I think that comes very much of help in providing clarity and solutions internally as well as to your clients. So an appetite for that is also very important along with space law.
Really well said, Tanushree. I'm sure that's echoed by the others as well. Anything to add from your side, Geetanjali?
I think everyone's pretty much covered it, but I think this is more from a personal point of view, to not be hesitant to take the jump. if you're not starting out in the space industry fresh out of law school, it is absolutely fine. Like Tanushri just mentioned, having that sort of understanding of how companies operate, how due diligence is done, acting as legal counsel for investors, these sort of skill sets do come in extremely handy, if you want to transition later on into the space sector. So my transition was also actually preceded by just sending a lot of cold emails to academics based out of India, based out of NUJS, GNLU, and NALSAR, several other law schools across the country, as well as globally. And surprisingly, a lot of them responded to, help me understand, how does a career trajectory look like, moving from a corporate law to a space law and policy, transition. So I think it's important to be confident and believe in that passion that you have. And I think the rest will follow on from there. Just to add on a couple of things that have been happening in the recent past, law schools are organizing conferences and roundtables on air and space law, which did not exist at least the time when we were in law school a couple of years ago. Law firms are also taking an interest in space, having verticals dedicated to space law. So these are definitely positive signals. There are more opportunities today for law students to, choose from, be it in-house law firms, even policy think tanks. Those are excellent sort of options to venture into this sector.
Thanks, Geetanjali, and thanks for the tips as well. I think those are super useful. With that, let's jump into the Q&A session. So those in the audience, please fill in the Q&A section with any questions you might have. We'll start with the first one from our moon man, if I can call him that, from Jatan. Question to any or all interested. Based on your experience, how do you think space law is helping, enabling, or blocking collaboration in lunar exploration between India and the US, or India and other countries? Public-public, public-private, or private-private? Takers for this question?
If I can just probably take this, I think international collaboration is more a matter of external affairs and diplomacy, space diplomacy, and rather than space legal domestic space law. Domestic space law regulates the private players in India, working in India, or private players who want to operate inside the country. While collaboration like the Artemis Accord, etc., are more a matter of what I say, space diplomacy. And therefore, I do not think that, yes, a space law would definitely help because, private players definitely are important stakeholders who promote and push for collaborations, for nation to nation collaboration. But the absence of a space law, I wouldn't think would impede or block the collaborations. Open to a different view.
I think to add on to what Rishi said, I think it's certainly helping or enabling collaboration. We have, apart from the Artemis Accords, we also have Luna Policy Platform, a lot of other organizations coming up with recommendations on lunar resources, the legal and policy aspects that need to be looked at. So I would certainly say that it's enabling collaboration, and it's only going to increase in the coming few decades, to be honest, with the interest that we have seen towards the moon. Yeah.
So I think to add on here, it's actually the other way around. Whenever space agencies, through collaboration or individually, take on missions, it also leads to increased commercial interest, and a lot of the learnings that these agencies have transform into some sort of a framework, a legal framework, a cooperation framework, a standards framework, and a lot more. Uh, so while yes, the existing laws and the existing diplomacy or cooperation is enabling further steps by space agencies and between countries, but when it comes to private partnership, I think these missions will aid a lot of things like standards, the methods to look at cooperation, what to do when, say, dealing with complex questions like whose ownership is the IP of discoveries that are made or the resources that have been mined. So these standards will only be set after a few missions have been undertaken. And this is typical of any industry where any highly regulated industry, I would say, or any like be it in nuclear, be it in ammunitions, be it in space, it's been a set precedent. So let's look at it the other way around as well.
Yeah, I think I quite agree with all the panelists here. And space law is something that is not only on one dimensional as such. It is on an international basis, A at first, which sets out what all the countries can do or cannot. Then even every national set of laws and policies have their own ways and means of permitting certain activities or restricting to a certain players. Like Keyur has mentioned, I think national agencies have been collaborating on various missions, including Luna. This also sets up or opens up opportunities for private sectors, as we can see that Artemis Accords is actually something, although it is non-binding, it is something at least which brings most parties to a consensus on certain principles and shows across a way to move forward. So I think it is quite on the positive side more than on the negative side.
Thanks, Tanushree. Jatin, I hope that gave you some answers. I'll move on to the next question from Shahid. This is on data rights and privacy. EO satellites collect vast amounts of data and potentially sensitive information. How can space laws balance the need for open scientific data with privacy rights on Earth?
I think my short answer to that would be to take a look at the UN balancing principles, where you have different categories of data, processed data, analyzed information, and how those tie in with privacy concerns as well, especially because you are collecting data that belongs to other countries. So there are guidelines that are there, which are provided by the UN, and countries are following that. It's a different thing, when they are implemented sort of into a binding national legislative framework.
Thanks, Gitanjali. I then move on to a barrage of questions from Narayan. So I'm going to read the first one out. Please go with anyone who wants to address it, go for it. Can you even consider in space a regulator when there is no legislature that gives them that position?
Maybe probably I'll take that question. It is an executive body because it has been set up by decision of the cabinet. Whether it is a regulator in the strict sense of whether it is a statutory body or not, I think that is a different question. Whether it has the backing of a statute is, that is moot in absence of a legislation. But is definitely an executive body which has been granted certain powers by the cabinet committee.
Okay. Then the second one, should promotion be separated with regulation to ensure that InSpace is actually a regulator, given that a promoter by nature cannot be a regulator as well?
Okay, I'll take this one. I think it's not necessary really to bifurcate, right? Today, when we look at businesses across the globe, everyone is lobbying for ease of doing business. Now, as a body, of course, if it's playing a two-faceted role, there are challenges that can be looked at legally, operationally, etc. But especially in space, I think there it's high time that after we've looked at transformation in the financial sector, where regulatory sandbox had become the most innovative means of governance to enable new technologies coming in, to now looking at governance models where there is less government, more governance. And that can only happen when such a model is taken up. And specifically to the space sector, it is very difficult to distinguish both the roles, so to say, because when you look at the nature of engagements that would be carried out even by the private entities, unless there is active support from the government to go across the globe, enhance cooperation with your vendors, with your customers, look at procurements by foreign government, participate in foreign space programs, look at joint grants, joint development, all of these issues often come down to the same question: 6 7 regulators having their foot in to make that one decision. And when you're looking at hundreds of projects, and when you're looking at the growth that was envisioned, at least in the decadal vision that was released by InSpace, this is certainly one of the most innovative experiments that has come out. And I'm an optimist, so I would like to believe it's going to play out well. And I think the past year says that it has.
Thanks, Keyur. We are getting close to our time. So I'm going to go with a question from Rageshwar. Given the current disparity in space law regulations worldwide, what principles should guide the development of a cohesive and balanced framework for governing space activities? And maybe I will tie that to Ashutosh's question as well. As the space industry grows exponentially in India, what would be the next step for Indian space regulation? And he's asking this in the context of the draft Space Activities 2017, which is now lapsed, and the Indian Space Policy 2023, which is seen as a guiding document without statutory backing.
Just take Ashutosh's question over there. So, like we had seen in the Indian space policy, we had seen what the responsibilities are of the different authorities. And the next step would be to expect to receive the guidelines for authorization of space activities, which would be issued by InSpace. So that is the document which is, going to have the legislative backing, which I think a lot of concerns had been raised publicly when the Indian space policy was released.
Okay, taking on the second part of actually the first question, which is what principles should guide the development of a framework for governing space activities, I think there are largely three areas that become the most important. One is respecting whatever treaties India has signed and making sure that that translates into something which binding law and binding frameworks can also ensure compliance with by the private sector, which is going to undertake these activities. Second is also looking at regulations beyond space and beyond FDI in terms of commerce and other areas, and also applications, geospatial data, telecommunications, licensing of allied services. It is important that these frameworks also evolve with the space law so that there is investor confidence and you can look at more sustainable R&D and more commercial activities happening in the country. So a guiding principle should certainly be to enable businesses to those end with related ministries. And one more and the most crucial part, I think, dual use technologies. So it is very, very, very important that both in the frameworks that are enacted by the government in terms of whether it be more clarity issued in our export control, be it in additional checks and balances which are placed. Along with that, us as institutions, we also need to build resilient frameworks in-house to ensure that we can earn the confidence and we can sustain the confidence of not just foreign governments, but also our partners, and get integrated into the global value chain in a resilient manner. So these three guiding principles should be good, at least to give us a kickstart as startups and go further down, launching more things into space, I think.
Just to add on to what KU said, I think in terms of an approach, I would think that the way forward would be to have a bottom-up approach by adoption of norms, the importance of non-binding best practices that will play a very important role in making sure that there are principles in place for space actors to follow. This is taking into account the reality that we see around the world today, the geopolitical tensions, the difficulty in getting states to have a consensus on the matter, for on certain issues to have, be on the same page. So I think in terms of approach, that would be the way forward, especially for innovations that are taking place, such as active debris removal, space situational awareness. And that is where I think industry will play a very important role.
Thanks, Geetanjali. Thanks, Keyur, as well, for adding on to that. Um, Sadly, we are out of time, so we will have to close the session. Firstly, so before we wrap up, a huge thank you to the panelists and to our fantastic audience, of course. Thank you for joining us and being a part of this discussion. I'm sure there are more questions to come up. The nice thing is that all four of our panelists are lovely people, so reach out to them on LinkedIn. In our offline discussions, of course, they've expressed their interest to do outreach and to support any young lawyers or otherwise with questions they may have. So please do reach out to them.